Hey, so this is the last of five sustainability summits that we've run this week. And this one is all about ethical business. And I'm delighted to be joined by my good friend and also very distinguished author and knowledgeable person about ethical business, John Grant. So John, do you just want to explain what you've been doing in this field? Because you've done so much over your career in the green and ethical business space.
I can do. So I was part of an agency in the 1990s that was an ethical business called St. Luke's, and we were a very unusual ad agency in several ways. We were one of the first to go what I called free range and to have what we'd now call a hot desking office, but we also had a workplace democracy. Everybody in the company was actually an equal shareholder, and we were very focused on sustainability, responsibility, and ethical issues. And we had clients chivying on us on that, like Anita Roddick in the Body Shop. And we worked with a huge range of businesses, IKEA, HSBC, the BBC, and so forth. But we were always quite forward on that. And I've been involved in several ethical startup businesses since. But also I'm mainly an author and advisor. I'm a sort of creative strategist in the marketing field. I've written a number of books, and all of them have been about marketing as a positive force for good in some ways, but some of them been more about lifelong learning or well-being or digital. Three of them have been about sustainability, and the most recent one was called Greener Marketing, whose main theme, which we can talk about some of this, was moving from not bad to net good, which is where I see a lot of this going. So I have been working with organizations large and small, including Laura's, for decades, and it hasn't got any easier. So I'm really looking forward to learning something this lunchtime too.
Well, John was a huge inspiration and has been for some time. And when we were starting to think about doing this sustainability reporting, it was a big input from him around the idea of trying to move towards being regenerative as well as just sustainable and not bad. So that's become one of the central pillars of what we've talked about in our report. And we're doing lots of other really exciting branding projects and things, which will be things we will be revealing this year, which is very exciting. We were planning this session and we had a really interesting discussion. We thought we'd start off by talking more generally about ethical business before we deep dive into some of the things I wanted to focus on in this session, which relate to the sustainability report and what we've done so far. But before we dive into that, I was thinking it'd be really interesting to share just some thoughts I have, and I know John has millions of thoughts as well, on what is an ethical business, and if you're trying to get into the world of ethical business and maybe even set one up yourself, how do you even go about thinking about it? And I'm not saying I'm an expert, John is actually, but just my thoughts, and it'd be really good to sort of have really good discussion about it. So I just threw a few slides together just to kind of explain the way I think about it. So when I think about ethical business, and the reason I've always been interested in ethical business is that I think it's the perfect place between being business as usual, which was never something I wanted to do, where we only focused on maximizing profits, and working in a charity. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I was sort of quite drawn towards working in charities. But as I started doing projects, and a lot of them sort of voluntary projects, much earlier on in my career, I realized how hard it was to be in that space, because funding is always such a big issue. So you can do an enormous amount of good, but it's actually really hard. I was doing a project once with the water company Bellu, who are a social enterprise, and the founder told me that one year he did about, with some crazy number, more than 20 fundraising rounds. I think it may have even been higher than that. And it just was really hard for him to grow his business because he didn't have a sustainable business model. So I knew I didn't want to do that, because I wanted to create something where we weren't dependent on sort of charitable donations. But I felt that being an ethical business was great, because if your goodness is built into the product that you sell, you can actually, there aren't as many trade-offs. You can do well financially, and then at the same time, the more things you sell, the more good you do. So I sort of think that it sort of sits in between being a social enterprise and being business as usual. And of course, there are responsible businesses where they do sort of extra things like like a sort of a scheme or volunteering and all of those things, but there's always a trade-off between what they're sort of doing as their core business. I think for them, if their objective is to maximize profits for their shareholders, then they they're always sort of wondering how much of that to do. And I think with an ethical business you don't really have those kinds of issues. But anyway, John, you're the expert on this.
Well, it's a really interesting that there's a huge, I think, map in the space around ethical business and social enterprise. So social enterprise, there was a study by Said Business School that found way back in 2014, there were more social ventures launched in the world than commercial ventures. And a social venture in their study was just defined as one that had a social purpose, which could be an environmental purpose or a help people purpose, or it could be a nursing company, but it had a social purpose as well as a commercial purpose, which is to, to make reasonable returns for whoever put money in, shareholders or owners or whatever. And that, so you've got one tension there between social good and financial good and doing well and doing good. I actually think the ethical business, nothing in ethics is simple. I mean, you can go back to Buddhist scripts and just say you should do right work, and running a whole food cafe, there's not much not to like about the whole food vegetarian or vegan Buddhist cafe in Bethnal Green and the people that work there. But most, even if you went in there, I don't know if they have the scale to have the oversight to really understand where some of their ingredients have come from. And I think it's potentially a mistake in ethical business to try and be wholly good. And if you, for instance, make skincare whilst you are avoiding a whole range of things, and you have a product which is has goodness built into it, there are people at the hippie fringe of skincare who would use some Castile soap and oil and a few things more from a food shop, and wouldn't have any packaging, and there wouldn't be any luxury either, because it's a sort of a bit of a shaker mentality. So, and I spoke to a friend of mine who was running a social mission investment, like an impact investment fund, and their mission was to further everything by furthering the development of women and girls in the developing world. That was, I've used the word developing a lot, but you see what I mean. It was girls supporting projects. Her favorite project, and she said that all the ones that work are always 80-20 or 20-80. So she said one of her favorite projects was a brilliant thing that came out of a new wax to seal floors. And this was a huge commercial opportunity. There was something like 5 million earth floors in sub-Saharan Africa where they were working. And that was a huge growth opportunity, because sealing them, this company was, and it was taken off like wildfire because people really liked that. She said the implication was that women and their daughters didn't spend half the day trying to keep the place clean because it was so dusty, and mopping and all this kind of stuff. And it reduced diseases and time off school. So you could show every time a village fitted these floors, there were concrete positive outcomes, but it was a sort of 80% commercial opportunity, an untapped market, and 20% driven by the impact and other things. Like I said, you could set up a Mother Teresa business that was over 80%. So that is that's a whole bundle of things. But I think some of the art of running an ethical business is to be alive to the conversation, to know that you're not wholly good, and to be making choices every day that side, just on the right side of the fence. But you do actually do this every day, Laura. So where are you on that?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think one of the most interesting points in an ethical business journey, we haven't really got there yet because we're still reasonably small. I think, how do you grow it to some scale where you can really make an impact? Because as you say, you can be very, very ethical indeed and very tiny, or maybe you could make something that appeals to more people but isn't quite as pure in its values. But actually, which one does more good? And is it better for Nike to swap 1% of its cotton to organic cotton? And that will make a huge difference versus, someone making handmade t-shirts, which will make an enormous difference, but only on a small number of people. And I think that when businesses get sold, there's often a really interesting decision point. It's happened for quite a lot of bigger businesses than mine. So, you know, Innocent or Body Shop or Stonyfield Farm yogurts, all these sorts of businesses got sold to bigger businesses. And at the time, customers potentially became disappointed and they said, oh, they've sold out. But I remember the CEO of Stonyfield Farm said, well, I'm doing a reverse takeover. They got bought by Danone. We're actually going to get Danone greener. And imagine how much impact we can have if we can get Danone to actually become more ethical than they were. So, you know, maybe that some of those values can kind of go to the larger parent, but it's certainly an interesting challenge. And we're lucky because so far I haven't taken any money from any investors who have different values to mine. I've managed to grow my business and keep ownership of my business, and I don't plan to sell it. And so I may do one day, but that's not in my my plan. And so I'm not really thinking about what venture capitalists or other investors think is the right thing to do. I'm just doing what we think is the right thing to do. And that's sort of a lot easier. But, you know, how far can I go? I'm not sure. We'll see where we get to. But at some point that will potentially be, you know, we're wondering whether there's a point beyond which it isn't handmade anymore. I'm not sure what that point is. Again, I don't think we've reached it because it is still handmade. But is there a point beyond which we shouldn't grow? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it's a question
you always
asking ourselves.
And the thing is as well, you hit that question at 20 people, 80 people, 2,000 people. And, you know, there's always a sort of, oh, what if we grow and we sell out? I think I think everybody has a sort of probably a mental model, and be interesting to explore if ours are the same. I really liked the BlackRock statement this week about, you know, the key phrase was like the transition, the green economy transition, and we all need to be on that transition. And I sort of think of this as a road. And actually what was ethical in the 1990s with Stonyfield Farm, there's a lot of questions about dairy now. So I don't know, you know, the questions keep changing as we go up that road, but we're on a transition to health, equity, sanity, livability, hopefully not a million extinctions, but we're sort of on a journey. And I tend to judge anything large and small because I'm a consultant. I'll judge what I work with. And I sort of think, will this take us further up that road? And it could be working, you know, with a global soft drinks company, which has all sorts of questions. But if I think my working with them for a month can move them and us, you know, their billion consumers a few yards up that road, I'll do it. And then in other cases, I might not work with something that I actually think is too niche to move that. But I wonder if that's your picture, Laura. I suspect you've got another one, because I think your place, I'm a road traveller. I'm always dropping into other people's journeys. And I think maybe you are building something more like a guild.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think at the moment, when people ask me that question, you know, where are we going and how far do you want to take this? What do you want this to look like? I kind of always say, well, I think we should just keep going. I'm not growing it faster than it's naturally growing. I'm always a big believer that actually growing things organically, because you make good products, because people like to use them, because they then recommend them and they use more of them, is the right way to grow a business. I've never been a big fan of having to spend a lot of money advertising or working with sort of external parties to convince people to buy the products, because if the products aren't any good, it's a really expensive way to grow a business. And so I sort of see Evolve and the other things we're working on naturally and organically growing. And as I come up with new ideas for things and can see opportunities to make it greener or to make better products or different products, I'm just sort of continuing on that journey, and I'm sort of doing it quite instinctively in many ways. And when people say, well, what's your 3-year plan, I think they always expect me to give them a number, and I kind of say, well, I'm planning to launch this or that, and they say, well, how big is your business going to be? And I say, well, I don't know. It depends what happens. They don't really like that answer very much.
I think there's probably a map of different types of ethical business, and I think you're describing one which is in a way quite traditional. It's why they use the word guild. It's holistic. It's a set of human people doing human things together and making something of value and being authentic. And it's not that different from the way that somebody might have run, a bakery in a town in Frankfurt 500 years ago, where actually most of the people in their factory would live in their house and they were a community making bread, and they're probably really proud of their bread. And I think there are some other models.
I think there are other models. Mine is more like a family business. You're right. It is quite a sort of traditional model from that perspective.
And sometimes I guess it must become stressful being sort of mother hens of such a big family, because you're not as small as you used to be.
No, it's funny. I think because I am responsible for 35 people's livelihoods and incomes and families and things, and I'm really aware of that. I mean, particularly this year with everything that's happened, trying to keep our business growing, make sure that we are sustainable financially as well, because we want to keep employing these people. We pay their, all of their rent and all those things. It's really important to manage the business sustainably in all senses of the word. And it's funny because I suppose at the beginning I found that quite scary. I guess I've got used to the fact that I've got responsibilities, and as a business owner you do, and there's lots of them. So it's not just looking after people, it's also thinking about making really safe products so that we don't ever hurt anybody, because we would hate that to happen.
If you wanted to, just say somebody's watching and they want to grow a business of their own that grows to 35 people and has those concerns, because I wanted to jump onto another couple of topics that you've mentioned, but if you were to hand them on a post-it note 5 things that you've learned over the last decade that would be helpful for somebody going on the journey of growing this type of business, what kind of things would be on that list?
I think the key one is to really be passionate about what you do. So have a really strong passion. I think very few people go into this kind of thing and think, right, I'm just in it for the money. I just want to make the biggest business I can. I think it normally grows out of a passion or a purpose for something. And that's what kind of gives you and whoever you work with the sort of the drive and the motivation and the reason for doing what you're doing. Especially early on, it's a labor of love. So for us, it certainly was for the first 5 years. I didn't make any money out of it. I didn't take any money out of the business for a long time. And so you have to really love it. It's not the quickest way to make money, I think, but at the same time, it's incredibly rewarding if it's something you really are passionate about. And it can become, for me, it's my life work, really. This is what I'm doing, and this is what I love doing. I think the other thing is we didn't take money, and that's a decision that not everyone grows a business that way. You can take money early. It depends on the type of industry you're going into. Is it a high growth industry? Actually, even in cosmetics, it can be. So other big brands have done it totally differently to me. But I think when you are starting up, if you want to do something a little bit different, making small mistakes and really bootstrapping and really understanding all the different bits of your business and, really being scrappy at the beginning can make you very creative. And sometimes I wonder whether I would have grown faster if I'd taken some investment earlier in my business journey, but I think I would have just made more expensive mistakes. And so I'm glad I didn't, because actually we did make mistakes. We made loads of mistakes, but we made them quite small mistakes in terms of financially. And also it just kept us now we have a really creative and innovative mindset because we never had any money. And so, we always used to find the most creative way to solve problems. And that sort of culture is really embedded in our team. And this year, I think that's been incredibly helpful because we've been able to be really nimble and really resourceful and just sort of changing things. So, just little things. We launched a hand sanitizer in 2 weeks because we felt that we should make one. And we were able to just be really, really quick in terms of how we moved. And we moved all of our training and education team who were going into stores. And we then sort of found a new model to be able to deliver some of those consultations to people who couldn't get to stores and do all of that online. So we made a few changes. We had loads of problems with ingredients being out of stock. We couldn't get, our packaging was requisitioned by the NHS this year. And we had to, we ended up doing a campaign. We gave people a bigger jar for the same amount. So we turned it into a positive. But yeah, because of our culture of being really creative, and I think that we grew out of the fact we never had any money at the beginning. That's only 2 things, but it's kind of long things.
No, but there were loads of points in there. I was sort of reminded, I really like applying sort of stories and archetypes to what we do. And sometimes I use that in my work on sort of branding. I remember talking to the leader of a big company, and she herself suggested that she was positioning herself as Joan of Arc. She was the first female CEO of a company for some hundreds of years and was really sending a signal about change and crusade and other stuff. And I said, I did actually pipe up, you have to be really careful with that story if you don't want to be burnt at the stake. But I think when I was listening to you, I think it's so true when I've worked with entrepreneurial companies that are sort of in the hot, they're sort of forming brands rather than managing them, and they're forming companies. Right? It sort of reminds me of Homer's Odyssey. And there's points in that story where Ulysses is just holding on to driftwood by his fingernails to try and make it through the storm another day, to make it to the shore. And there's a real sense of self-reliance, ingenuity, and things like that. And it's part of that road. I was talking to an entrepreneur and client of mine who's got this sort of a cafe chain style business. And he said, I can tell across the world where one of my peers has sold their business, because it's like turning off the engines on a plane. You can see, in 6 months' time, they start looking more and more like McDonald's or something corporate. Because I think the other side of the world that I operate in business is more like, the siege of Troy. There is these huge giants, and all the language that people use is based on, war and competition and targeting. And something we've talked about, which isn't so easy to talk about in business, but we were talking about values, and I was using the word care, and you said, well, I think, the core of that is actually love.
Oh, I have a slide on that. Let me flip that, because
brilliant. What a segue.
Slide about care. Well, there were two actually. The first one was that care was, our idea was that it was sort of beyond green and clean. And so it was sort of moving things forward. And when we talked about this last time, we talked about the fact that actually, to some extent, this reconnection with people is actually going back to the bakery in 16th century medieval times, when everyone knew each other. And it's been really just during the Industrial Revolution when we were disconnected from where things came from. And now we're all trying to reconnect with where things come from, how things are made. Because that's about caring and just understanding as well, because sometimes you just don't know what's going on, and that's why it seems like you don't care. But just having all those stories, knowing the supply chain, knowing how things are made, makes you care. Well, you did care anyway, you just didn't know that there was a problem before. So we were making that slide, weren't we? And then there was another one about care, which was more about evolve and care. Which looked like this, which is basically everything we do is about love and caring. It's just different angles of it. So whether it's caring for the planet, caring for people, and then how we how we work with people, and caring for people's skin, which is really our mission around wellness and helping people to be more healthy, is really super important. And I think it boils down to those 4 values in the middle.
Yes. And they're all about, the Ulysses thing, they're all about coming home. It's like his whole struggle is to reunite with his family and, for all to be right in the world. And I think this is sort of yin and yang of entrepreneurs. I remember this with Anita Roddick, that on the one hand, she was like a passionately caring, the most human person you could meet, funny, rude, passionate, unbelievably, so much heart in business. At the same time, she was incredibly shrewd. I asked her once what her business model was, and she said, well, it's simple, John. We put all the money in the product, not the packaging. And she absolutely had those 2 views in mind every day as she did things. And I think I see that with you and other people who are sort of walking this ethical business line, is that actually it has to make sense in both terms. It's not ethical to not be able to pay your 35 people at the end of the year, and that that's part of the struggle too. And also what the ingenuity in the middle works on is always like squaring that circle.
I think that's right. And the other thing is, as I've grown the business, what's been really amazing is that the people who've come on board have just share a lot of those values, and that's happened more and more as time's gone on. And everyone lives a similar kind of lifestyle. They really get excited, and the team that I have, I'm so grateful for them. They've helped me so much with this and with everything we're doing. But just looking at this sustainability report, I didn't write it all myself. I had to, my team will help me. So very early on, it's hard to necessarily do things as comprehensively when you're first setting up the business. And we couldn't, we did get organic certification, and we were using recycled materials. We used recycled milk bottles when we first started Evolve, but creating the sustainability report would have been out of our reach. We wouldn't have had the resources to write it or to be able to get all the data and all those things. So I think if you're thinking about setting up an ethical business, you have to sort of go through it. It's a bit of a journey. You can't do everything all in one go, and we certainly didn't. And when we moved in 2015, we stopped working with a third-party manufacturer and we moved all of our business in-house, and we now have our own eco studio. But we lost our organic certification at that point because we couldn't just make the paperwork work. We just couldn't do it, and we had to compromise a little bit at that point. But this past year, we've now got all of those certifications back for the product. So and now we're trying to go beyond where we've ever been before to do all of this footprinting. So the plastics footprinting, the carbon footprinting, which is what we've been talking about in our report and all week about all the different sort of things we've done. And then, you know, we're still going. We haven't finished yet. There's a massive project we need to do to really understand our supply chain, because it's really opaque. And we talked about this. I'm transparent about the fact that I don't like the fact that I don't fully understand where everything comes from. And cosmetics, it's really unsatisfying that we don't know exactly where everything comes from. And we have 180 ingredients and we don't. So there's a big project there to try and really understand that, so that we can make sure that everything is at the standards that we want it to be. But we're not as big as the Body Shop, of course, and so we can't say to our manufacturers, you know, we're going to audit you and we want you to fill in lots of questionnaires, because they won't. So we need to find ways of doing it, working with agencies like EcoCert, who do the Cosmos standard, to see whether we can, you know, come up with some ways of collecting it. But that's a big project coming up for next year.
I think there's kind of the interesting thing about, if you set off in the direction of the angels, you're kind of deviled. But the that, like, you've mentioned several of the devil's horns in working with ethical businesses. One is money, and finance is an aspect of that, and the other is actually brand and perception and visibility and appearance. And I think, you know, the work that you've been sharing here with the values was intended to be part of ensuring that the way that the brand expresses itself outside is genuinely just coming from the culture and the purpose of the business and not falsifying itself. But, you know, what I mean by being devil by brand is we genuinely had the discussion that you've been doing this, you know, for decades, really, and there are new people arriving on the scene every year who were born last year. But I worked with a big haircare company called Aveda, who genuinely were setting standards that have yet to be reached now with some of what they've done with sustainability in the 1990s. But the difficulty is, if you've been around for a long time, the newer clean beauty Instagram built businesses can seem further ahead, and branding, it, you know, perception, it is important to attract customers and to be seen as leading. So, you know, I don't have an answer on that, but, you know, it is a struggle, isn't it, to be authentic, but also to be seen as, you know, leading the pack.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we want to make sure that we we're there to try and, you know, move things forward. So that's, you know, hence the name, trying to help to show what's possible, giving customers a clean alternative. And we do see lots of others making a lot of noise in the market, and we never really talk about anybody else, but we want to make sure that our voice is heard too, but also we're quite rigorous about the way we approach things. So I was surprised to learn, and I don't know if this is definitely true, but I think we might be the first climate positive beauty brand, possibly in the UK and possibly even beyond the UK, and we're just fact checking that now. We think we're also the first plastic negative beauty brand in the UK. So, you know, there's a lot of people making noises, but have they really done their homework? Have they gone as far as we would go, you know, with trying to be transparent and honest about it? Because, you know, you can say some lovely things and put something green on your bottle, and lots of people do that, but, you know, does it really run all the way through the business?
It's one of the things I've been struggling with. I've written several books on green or greener marketing, and I've really struggled with the word green because it's not very far from greenwash, but I prefer it to sustainability. But the difficulty of squaring marketing, which is always wanting to show the most flattering things in the most flattering positive light, with sustainability, which is methodical. You know, some parts of sustainability are about checking that your factories have fire extinguishers and, you know, things like that. So it's quite tangible, and it involves having no, you know, traditionally sustainability has been about having no skeletons in the cupboard, and it's been difficult to combine the two because you can get miscommunication from one to the other. But also, it's not about looking green, and it's sort of, there's more actually. I mean, it's really impressive if you're, you know, net zero and plastic net zero, because you do have a physical place where you make products and you do have a footprint. If you just had an Instagram account and a arrangement with a factory, operationally it'd be rather easier to do. But there is definitely a hard slog side to it, isn't there? That actually, in order to do this, I know you're looking at B Corp, aren't you? And that's sort of like doing a university dissertation or something.
That's kind of the next step in our journey, I think, and it is a journey. And actually, the other thing I'd say is that yes, you need to have some resources and some data, but doing the carbon footprinting that we've done so far and the plastic footprinting wasn't as hard as I expected it would be. And I wish we'd done it earlier, actually, when we started, because I think in the end it took us probably 6 to 8 weeks to do it, which was nothing in comparison to what I expected. So I think B Corp is probably a bit more involved, and that's why I'm hoping to get it done this year. We'll see. You have to reach a certain score to be able to get the certification, so fingers crossed we'll be good enough. And yeah, we'll hope to do it this year, and it should be okay, I think. But yeah, I think that it's certainly something you need to focus on if you want to do it, and I think you need to be committed to it, but it's not impossible. I think that's important. And I think the thing that is that our customers passionately care about a number of different ethical issues, and we've covered quite a lot of them throughout the week. I'm just going to share a couple more slides because I want to talk about a few of the other areas that we've worked in as well. Whoops. This presentation's gone a bit crazy. Right. So if we look at our pillars, so we've got, are they all a bit?
Zero waste is so light, your footprint, I can barely read it.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, the slide's a bit pale, but we've got the ones we've covered so far this week. We've got zero carbon, zero waste. We talked a bit about those, the plastic and the climate positive. On Wednesday, we were talking all about clean chemistry, which includes all of our organic certification and biodiversity, because we're trying to move away from using palm oil. And then there's a sort of a fifth pillar, which we're calling kind to all. And within that, we've sort of grouped a lot of the other things that we're doing. So this is about basically being respectful and kind and giving back, and that's about people, that's about animals, and just sort of generally about being ethical. So as well as all the other things we've mentioned, I just wanted to sort of make sure that we'd sort of explained a bit about those, because some of them are interesting. I know people have a lot of questions in this area as well. So we're a female-led business. We're out of our 35, we have 2 men and the rest are women, and the business is owned by mostly by me and my family, so female owned and independently owned. We've grouped all of our sort of kind to animals certification in this pillar. So we're in the middle of getting our vegan society certification. The reason all the products are vegan, but we're just doing the paperwork for the vegan society, which is hopefully we'll get all finished this year. The other thing is, we don't know about all of our supply chains as much as I would like, but I do know that mica, which is a problematic supply chain because there can be child labour in mica, which is the gold pigment that we use in some of our lovely golden shiny products. We only use fairly traded mica, and we were very sort of conscious of that being a particular thing we needed to check. We've been doing some work on diversity in 2020. So I like the idea of trying to find ways to actually help with the root causes of problems. So one of the things that I thought was there were a lot of amazing women beauty entrepreneurs who I can mentor. So I've been mentoring some BAME women entrepreneurs this year. And I think that is a kind of something that I can actually physically do to help in that area. And I'm sort of always quite keen to sort of do real things rather than just sort of signal things. In that same area, we've put in a new hiring policy as well this past year. So we make sure that and we have a third party recruiter who helps us with this. So she makes sure that nobody sends through photos, so that she is trying to reduce any unconscious bias they have in their selection process. We've also, I think it's important to remember that our core mission actually is to be a wellness business, to help people with their health, as well as all the other things that we're doing with the sort of environmental side. So the actual core content that we've been trying to create this year, it's been a pandemic. We know it's been really hard, and it's only a drop in the ocean what we can do, but trying to create a lot of wellness materials for people, things about mindfulness and meditation. We had a whole wellness toolkit in the first lockdown. And then, of course, we launched the hand sanitizer, and we launched a sleeping mist as well, which was another thing, because we know everyone's been struggling with sleeping this year. So everything is about sort of, you know, on this one, it's a bit of a mixed bag of different things that that we've been doing. We donated to the NHS this year as well. And in this area, really, it's about sort of finishing off all those certification programs. You know, our future goals are to finish off the Vegan Society certification, get a Leaping Bunny certification, which is the cruelty-free one, which again, it's a paperwork project trying to get declarations from all of our suppliers to the fact that everything hasn't been tested on animals. But the big one I mentioned already is to really understand more about our supply chain, and that's not just about ethical standards, that's a huge part of it, but it's also about the carbon footprint of our entire supply chain for ingredients. And that when we do that, we can finish off our full carbon footprint and offset it. So far we've only been able to offset the bit we've measured, which is everything except for the ingredients. Another one we're trying to do this year is living wage and living hours certification. So we only pay people living wages. We don't have 0 hours contracts. And there's a certification that we're going to apply for this year to sort of prove that. And the B Corp, of course, and transparency. So yeah, that's sort of a bit of a laundry list, but I wanted to make sure that we had covered it and discussed it.
Interesting topic. If you go back to your previous slide with the headings, so kind to all was one of the
let me see if I can do that. Yes, there we go.
Because you could have put kind to all at the center as the thing that links all the other ones.
Yes, you could.
And I was chatting to somebody who founded a chocolate business in Brazil, and it was through my connections originally with Natura, but they basically said that the philosophy of the business was to be kind to people at both ends of the journey. So kind to the people in the forest that grew the cacao, and using agroecology and a mix of crops so that they could like ensure their livelihood and have good working conditions and good education for their children and so forth. But looking after those people so that those people would look after our forests, and also looking after people that eat the chocolate. And they didn't use added sugar in the chocolate. They only used the sweetness of the fruits and nuts, and they would only use things that came from the same farms in the Amazon. So there was no, if they had a fruit, all of their stuff was fruit and nut, but there was no walnuts because walnuts don't grow in the Amazon. And they just said, you know, there's sort of people love chocolate, but they don't, you know, they don't love diabetes, and we should be helping them with that too. But I think it is possible to have a tree trunk concept, and in a small villagey family business, it doesn't have to be stated in a rule book or something, but it genuinely helps as you grow a bit. It helps people to know how, you know, to navigate working there and what success looks like. I think kindness is quite close to the center, but I think you're also you so love what you make. You're so excited when you make a mica gold face mask and other stuff. And I think if you didn't have that passion, you wouldn't connect with the people that buy the stuff.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think you could do it either way. And what we wanted at the heart was this idea about sustainability and regeneration. But effectively, that's driven by a passion and sort of, you know, wanting to help as well. So it's sort of all coming from a similar heart-based place, whichever way around you put it on the impact pillars. I wanted to open up to questions a bit. We've had one question so far in the chat, but I'd like to open up. I'd like to come off screen share. Because I think that's
brilliant. There's more questions coming. I can start answering the first one. So I saw it come up before, and it was just like, it was basically, John, what do you do for a living? To your consulting business, at what point do the majority of your clients engage? So hugely diverse. My platform is that I research and write books, which mean that I'm quite up to date with a lot of case studies on, you know, the mixed success that loads of other people have had, and I have quite a lot of different experiences to draw on. But if I take the last week, I worked with a company in Helsinki and Singapore who are trying to invent the future of food, and they're making basically protein working with microbes rather than plants and animals. And it's one of the things, like George Monbiot wrote about it in The Guardian, it's one of the things that predicted to take over from things like the dairy industry. And the question was, you know, should we make tofu, or, you know, what should we actually make? You know, Impossible Burger made, you know, things which are at the sort of, you know, the meat and burger end, but should they be making, you know, should they be making a new form of avocado on toast, or what. So, and that is quite upstream. So I do have some work with innovation people where I'm sort of bringing trends and insights and a bit of creativity. At the other end of the scale, I've got a call later helping a large corporate branded company launch their latest branded, Save the Planet initiative. And it's very much a communications task and briefing creators and producing communications. I've been working with Lauren team on trying to finally nail down some pack copy and, some other points in between. But I kind of, I tend to have some focuses. I do a lot on communication and brand and meaning. And I tend to, because I'm such a small operator, I don't really have a business model. I tend to wander from one thing to the next if it looks interesting and it's interested in me. But thank you for asking. And, we can discuss consulting models and things. I think we've got some... Hi, Laura, would you consider partnering with the new startup to grow your ethical and sustainable footprint in the beauty industry?
Yes, I have been doing mentoring actually, and as I said, I've been working with Bain Women, but for a while I've been doing mentoring, working with other beauty businesses of all different sorts in the ethical space. And I don't have huge amounts of partners at the moment, and I don't have as much time as I used to have to do it, but I am interested in helping smaller businesses to grow, because I think that it's actually a surprisingly collaborative industry. Every founder I've met has been really, really collaborative and good at sharing. And we've always said we sort of stick together. The ethical beauty bit of the business sticks together. So I think it's actually a really nice space. And I've met quite a few of the other women CEOs, and we said, we're gonna try and get together and create forums and things, a bit like Isabel's suggesting, and I think it would be really good for experience sharing, and particularly when you're looking for new sources of materials and packaging and things, just sharing a lot of information on that so that we can get some of these technologies out there, I think is really helpful.
We've had a question. Would you and John consider setting up some educational seminars on how to build ethical businesses? I mean, apart from the one today where we kind of rambled.
Yeah, we did a bit, but it was, yes. I hope it was a helpful session.
I'm personally all for like knowledge sharing and educational seminars, and I do events like this probably most weeks. This is my second one this week, and I've got one next week, because I think, none of us can do all of this on our own. I've benefited so much across my whole career from people who've taken an interest, and also people who've shown me ways of doing things that I hadn't seen yet. So, and it's part of, my thing of being on the road is, that's where you meet interesting people as well. So, and some of those turn into projects or partnerships or lifelong friendships, but they, it's all part of the thing for me. So I'd certainly be willing to do that. Do you have any, hello, John, do you have any advice for entering employment within the ethical sectors? Is it a case of targeting specific brands, freelance, or through employment agencies? I think that's a very good question. I mean, the ethical sectors carries a lot of weight because there are, Laura's in the ethical beauty industry, and that is a particular sector. There is a huge amount happening in food and drink, in fashion. There are also ethical sides of the banking industry. There's ranging from new ethical forms of finance, but also to the fact that about a third of the people in many places of the world can't access banking, and things like microcredits have grown in that world. So I think it is probably, from an employment point of view, necessary to target a bit. Do you have any thoughts on that, Laura? Because you see a lot of people in a sense looking for ethical employment work.
Yeah, I was talking about this yesterday in one of the other seminars as well. What we found is that as time's gone on, I said before, we've had more and more people who are very passionate about the values that we have, which they share, and that's one of the reasons that they've come to us, which for us is an amazing thing, because it means that we get some fantastic people joining our team, and they're also really committed to the same things, and everyone's really super excited about the journey that we're on, which is great. often we get people coming and applying for internships with us, and that can be a good way to grow your experience if you're earlier on in your career. And we've taken people this past year into our marketing and sales team as interns. And also we have an amazing junior development chemist who came in as an NPD intern in the autumn. So they did have relevant experience, but not necessarily a lot of employment experience. They may have had relevant qualifications, or they could prove to us that they could write really well if they were coming in for marketing roles. So, you know, we're quite open-minded, but we because of our living wage and, you know, living hours policy, we do pay people the minimum wage, even for an internship, which I think is only the right thing to do. I don't think that free internships should exist, because I don't think that, you know, I think it exploits people, but it is a good way to get into things, to get some experience.
I think it is, you know, generationally, there are more and more people who want to work for something where they feel it's meaningful and making a good contribution, and they're proud of what's made. And I think there's a matter of self-esteem, which includes sustainability and ethics, but also being proud of the products and or the food that you serve and so forth. I mean, my advice, just based on my own life history, was I volunteered in a little development charity called War on Want, and was like, I thought that was where, you know, I was quite a politicized youth, and I wanted really to work in not so much green, but actually international development. And I did about 3 or 4 months in the press office, at which point I decided to go and work in advertising. And the reason was that I realized that I really couldn't contribute too much beyond stuffing envelopes until I got some skills. And when, you know, a team like Laura's, which is quite sort of lean and things, when somebody walks in with a passion and the same values, but also they're amazing at social media or the visual expression of brands or design or actually product formulation or so forth. So I wouldn't rush into this sector. I mean, I think when you're looking for first positions in this sector, bear in mind that, you know, you're going to be arriving like the doctor with their bag full of things that you can use to help people, and that building up those skills is the core thing. And everyday life in, you know, it's sort of like being in a boat. You're still sailing and getting the water out of the boat and other stuff, and you're sort of doing tasks and so forth. It's so much nicer to do that, and you feel so much less bad over when you have a stressy or long day than when you can sort of step back from it and go, wow, that was really worthwhile, even though it was stressy and difficult, all that kind of stuff.
No, I totally agree. I mean, we are still taking interns. We have a lovely new intern joining us very shortly in our marketing team, but we're still looking for an intern for our sales team at the moment. So I'll double check after this session that the link to that opportunity is on our website.
And there are more and more questions coming in about remote working internships and so forth. There seems to be a lot of interest on that topic. Just one other that's just popped up with, I think it's technically interesting, potentially legally interesting, is how do you decide if you'll work with another company as a stockist?
That is an interesting question. And actually yesterday I had a bit of an ethical dilemma about that, because we work directly with wholesalers and distributors across Europe, and the way that we would choose a partner is on a number of, be a number of factors. So we'd be looking at the commercial terms that we work with them. We'd be thinking about, are they the right partner for us to help us grow our business? Do they have the right footprint? Are they going to get our brand into the right places? Do they have the same vision that we have? All the kind of normal things. And, you know, we also want to make sure that the partners that we have are really fantastic to work with. So, you know, some of our partners, we have Jeanette here, who's from our Danish distributor, and they are one of our absolute favorite partners, because they're just so amazing.
Not just saying that because you're on the call.
No, but they are actually one of the most helpful and well organized and friendly distributor partners that we have, and there are many others as well. But you know, if a partner is difficult and it's hard to work with them, then, you know, we don't necessarily, it can sometimes be very time consuming, so it's definitely a factor. We actually had a situation where we had a complaint from an end customer that one of the intermediary companies didn't really share our values, and we were sort of having a bit of a dilemma. Is this something we should get involved in when our brand might be in a store where the store owner doesn't share our values? And it was actually hard, because I don't believe in stifling debate. I believe people should have opinions on things, and, you know, even if they don't have the opinions I agree with, I don't think that it's right that we cancel them. I'm not into cancelling people. So I was thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't get involved. It's not our, you know, it's not our decision really. But then at the same time, if our brand is in there, is it by association then, you know, going to be seen that we have those values? So it's a really tricky one.
We had this debate years ago, you know, Jamie, so you know the people involved, but Innocent Drinks, there was a crisis. Jamie was, I think his job title was Chief Squeeze, but he was like the MD or something. And he said, could you come and have a chat? We got a bit of a communications crisis. The crisis was that as a pilot, when the founders set up Innocent, the nearest they got to a purpose statement was we'd like to get some more fruit into kids. And they had an opportunity. McDonald's phoned them up and said, would you like to do a healthy eating trial in the Northeast? We want to put some of your smoothies into a couple of our outlets and then see if we can persuade the people who come in to have those instead of a Coke. And Innocent went, yeah, okay, that sounds interesting. Why not? And then somebody in the McDonald's PR department got hold of this, and it was like there's a huge headline newspaper saying Innocent works with McDonald's, at which point they started getting messages on the homepage. The one that stung most was the one that just said, thanks for all the smoothies, I'm off. Because in the 90s, there'd been the Mac Libel thing, and a lot of activists who rather liked Innocent Drinks back when they were innocent didn't like McDonald's. And Jamie said, well, look, it's not like we just blundered into this. We phoned up our friends at Greenpeace and they said, oh, you should work with them. They're one of the good guys now. They're our global partner in reforestation. And they thought, okay, that doesn't sound too bad. But Jamie also said, and this was my legal note, he said, we're also sold in Shell garages. And I believe on antitrust regulations, it would be illegal for us to tell wholesalers that they couldn't supply those garages. But it is kind of a debate, because who you're seen with and the context, if you're in a shop that's sort of selling you nuts, whatever you don't like, whether it's meat or cigarettes or whatever else, then, it would be a question. I think when you're going to partner, though, as opposed to being supplying things out there, then you have to share values, because otherwise when it comes to the crunch, you'll argue about something.
There's different levels of involvement. So, our close partners, we would always make sure that they really shared our values, because we want to work with people who are on the same, mission that we are. But I just think it's interesting, because I think that, there's more than one way to change that kind of debate. And I think that, just stopping people who have a different opinion from saying anything or doing anything doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So I was having a bit of a dilemma. Yeah. Then there's another question. In terms of starting a business, would you advise someone to only start with a few products and do it properly, and after that grow, or go full on with a wide range? I think that's, for my opinion, I think it's hard. It depends what it is, because, if you start with one product and you're pitching to a buyer and then she needs a full range to, say you're trying to get something into a supermarket and you've got your one little tiny product on the shelf, it's going to be hard to stand out. Sometimes you need to go in, you need to look at your category and really understand it.
I do one product 100% all the time. And it could limit if your one big idea is to provide a solution. So for instance, in one of your ranges, you've got 5 steps, then you'd have to have all 5 steps. And you shouldn't get in trouble for only selling size 8 to 12 clothes, because you're being restrictive and you're just trying to get those right, because that's unfair to anybody else who walks in, and you'll be called out on this, as actually Everlane was a while ago. But the reason for one product is I think it's so hard. Think of everything about launching a business is like launching a rocket, and there is this escape velocity that you need to reach to get this thing up in the air and orbiting successfully, and so many fall back to the ground. So just having one singular thing gives you more chance of getting the maximum impact. And the second thing is, as soon as you do a range of things, your destiny is set. If you do one thing and it's not quite right, you can pivot. I mean, the original Airbnb was selling spaces on actual airbeds in homes, and that was their idea. And they've sort of taken the airbed bit out, except of the name, but they had a flat and some spare space in the living room, so they did like airbed stays. But the ability, as people say, to pivot as you learn. So a really successful recent launch in Laura's market, I can't remember, Laura, if you showed this to me, but I love the product for its name, is Brazilian Boom Boom Cream, or it's spelt Bum Bum. But they just did one product, which was a really nice natural body cream. And, they've been doing really well in Sephora, and they've now got 3 products. And, that seems like, because if you start out trying to be L'Oreal, you'll end up with, ranges upon ranges, and it's really hard.
think it depends on your strategy as well. So I think if you're direct to consumer, then I think it's actually easier to do a one range product than it is if you want to work with shops where you need to kind of think about your display and things like that.
I think you need a singular idea. It may have different parts. You wouldn't launch Lego with just one type of brick.
No, it wouldn't really work. And the other thing I was going to say is that I like the idea of we did better when we made fewer of more products, because I felt that we had so many ideas when we opened the UK studio. We started making in small batches, partly because we either could make one enormous batch of one thing with our distributor, with our manufacturer, or we could go and make small amounts of lots of things. And that meant that our range was bigger, and we could also get a lot more information about what customers like. So, you know, maybe some of those ideas were rubbish, but it meant that we didn't have, if we had a crazy idea, we didn't have to order loads of them. We could actually just make a few and see if people liked it. So I think it made us a bit more innovative, and we kind of just learned a lot more doing it that way. I think they call it lean product development. I think it was quite helpful.
Other thing that's really important, and I remember right back at the beginning that Laura had this, is that you need a really strong point of view on what the gap is. And if that sounds like marketing textbook language, you know, what is the unmet human need out there, the service that you'll be providing to humanity, and, you know, what is that space, and just keep aiming for that space. So in Laura's case, organic and clean, as we would say now, products were complicated, difficult to understand, a bit elite and expensive, and you really, really wanted to make them accessible. And, you know, that's just such a simple need that you could just have that strategy on the wall and just check every day. Yeah, we could do that £200 bottle of algae stuff, but that's not actually meeting our core needs. And that kind of focus is really helpful too.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Having a laser focus on the customer need, I think, is very important. Well, we have been going for an hour, and I think John and I mean, I know
we literally, on the experience of other days, we could chat all day.
But I will wrap up because I'm conscious of everybody's time, and I want to just say thank you again for everyone who joined us and for your thoughtful questions. And thank you so much to John for making it a really interesting and fun discussion.
Pleasure as always.
All right.
Thank you too. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
See you.